The purpose of this study was to some extent sort of methodological. We wanted to know what the benefit was of having better data, essentially, on the welfare histories of parents. So what we did is we looked at what that correlation would look like between the welfare histories of parents and their children if we had only a single snapshot, a single year in which we observed the participation of parents in the benefit system. And as you can see, not surprisingly, the correlation would be relatively low, around 0.2. If you use these 14 annual observations on the welfare experience of parents, that correlation increases substantially to about 0.335 roughly. Okay, so basically what it says is if you had relatively poor data, which is certainly the history of a lot of earlier analysis, you would tend to systematically underestimate this correlation, this long-term welfare dependence between parents and their children. So the correlation turns out to be substantially higher if you have better quality data representing probably a better reflection of the sort of permanent history here for parents.
How are you defining long-term?
Well, long-term is in the sense of the welfare histories of parents. Okay, we just have 14 snapshots here. So you could observe parents who were drawing a benefit at each of the surveys between the ages of 1 and 14 for their children. So somebody in that situation would be obviously in a household that at least were drawing a benefit at the time of each of those surveys over that long age period. As I said before, we don't have information on what their experiences were between the surveys, and that is a problem in this analysis. And that sort of leads me to the next bullet point here, which is that we were still not convinced that we had uncovered the true indicator of the permanent status of the parents or this long-term welfare history because we just have 14 snapshots. What we tried to do was use some statistical techniques using what are called instrumental variables to try to get a sense for how large that correlation might be if we had even better data on those long-term welfare histories. Okay, so the basic idea is that we might have underestimated the true correlation. Let's try to put another estimator in place that would tend to overestimate the true effect, and maybe we can sort of squeeze the true answer in between two boundaries that are relatively close together. That didn't work so well. And the instrumental variable results tend to be substantially higher, and they tended to be very volatile. It really depended on what you used as an instrument, which isn't all that surprising. So we have sort of a bottom line estimate of probably around 0.35. The upper bound estimate could be even higher than that. It could be substantially higher. But for lots of reasons, we think this lower bound estimate is probably fairly close to the truth. Probably is around where we found. Just to end up with some extensions and conclusions, we found that these intergenerational correlations varied a lot across the subpopulations. They tended to be relatively higher for females, for daughters born to these parents. They tended to be higher for Maori. The Christchurch data is not very good for looking at ethnicity, however, so you have to keep that in mind. A lot of the Maori subpopulation here are people who have some Maori ancestry. So it is obviously not probably the right geographic region in which to do analysis on impacts by ethnicity, but that is one of the limitations of the Christchurch data. We also found differences based on the qualifications too, much higher correlations for young people who didn't gain school or tertiary qualifications.
In the case of gender and ethnicity, or in the case of ethnicity, do you follow the statistics department presentation of what people choose to call themselves?
Yeah.
In the same way as they do in the census?
Yeah. So if you go back to some of the earlier slides. So when you look at here at Maori, and you'll see that 112 of the 847 people in the sample are put into that category. These are people who have some Maori ancestry on either their mother or father's side. Okay, so a lot of those people would not have Maori ancestry on both sides, for example, or wouldn't be people who wouldn't have other ethnicity.
We make a choice about what our ethnicity is.
Yeah.
It's not decided on whether you're half, quarter, three quarters, or whatever. It's quite a different way to do things, and it's mostly acceptable within the population. But looking at the 735 non-Maori, that would be an interesting breakdown, I suspect, from our perspective.
Yeah, I really do think the problem with the Christchurch data is it's just such a small group of people who have ancestry, both Maori and Pacific Island, that it just isn't the right. I mean, yeah, particularly in Christchurch, and same thing really with the Dunedin data. If you know anything about the Dunedin study, which is the sort of the predecessor to the Christchurch study, it's the same problems really, just simply because of the geographic base for the population, and hopefully other panel data sets that are now in process that are based more nationally or in the Auckland region will probably be better longitudinal studies to do the sort of ethnic breakdown.
Why was Christchurch chosen? Because I wouldn't have thought that would have been the best place for a sample of that sort.
I don't really know, to be honest. I think it really was a follow-on to the Dunedin study just down the road, and I'm not sure why it was chosen to be in Dunedin in the first place.
I think it was the particular interests of the principal researcher, David Ferguson, who's driven it the whole way through.
Yeah, I think David was actually part of the Dunedin study. I was actually hoping David would be here to talk about this, but I think the original study, I think David was one of the participants in that, and then it was probably just where he was based after that fact. I don't know the history. I wasn't actually in New Zealand when these studies were underway. Okay, just back to that last slide on extensions and conclusions. One of the things that we wanted to do in the study was to talk a little bit about why this correlation might exist. I mean, to some extent, really what we're doing is sort of doing baseline analysis to try to figure out how large this correlation might be. But in the end, of course, you want to know why the correlation might exist and under what pathways it might operate, so what transmission mechanisms there might be in having children who are much more likely to be on the social welfare benefits coming from parents who also had a history of being on the benefit. One of the things we were able to do is to sort of divide that overall correlation between factors that seem to be related to lower educational attainment, lower qualifications of these young people. And it looks like roughly 1/4 of that overall correlation seems to be operating through the lower educational attainment of these children. And we thought that was very useful as a starting point. Obviously, there's a lot more work to be done to sort of tease out other pathways that might be here.
It's still not clear about what long-term dependency means in the child cohort.
Well,
We're only 16 to 21. Does that mean
it's just
being on benefit that long?
It's just proportion of time between age 16 and 21 that individuals were on the benefit. The problem with this study is that we only had data up through age 21 for the children, so that's as far as we could go.
So long-term is going to be longer for the parents than for the children, isn't it?
Yeah, well, in this case, long-term just simply means that you're spending the majority of time between ages 16 and 21 on a benefit.
But for the parents, it's a much wider, it's a much longer period.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so one of the things that we wanted to do with the study, of course, is to try to replicate these findings by using later waves of data, which would take us up to ages 25, 30, and beyond for the children. And one of the interesting things, of course, would be to look at the welfare experiences of children over roughly the same ages as the parents, many decades earlier.
Totally different life stage, aren't they?
Yeah.
Children compared to
Absolutely, yeah. So this was just preliminary analysis.